his book Buddhist Landscape, Art and Archaeology of the Khorat Plateau, 7 to 11 centuries. If you would like his signature at the back of this room, there is the selling desk for the book. Discount? How much? Yeah, the book is. Yeah, the book is 1,900 baht. So yeah, it's like a nice book and a really good writing. Okay. I think it's time to start. Good evening, everyone. On my behalf of the Siam Society, my name is Pipat Kachachan, a council member of the Siam Society and also a lecturer of Thammasat University in Department of History. Stephen Murphy is a Pratapatitaya Paul, senior lecturer in curating and museology of Asian art at SOAS, University of London. He is specialized in the art and archaeology of Buddhism and Hinduism in the first millennium CE, Southeast Asia, with focus on Thailand and Laos. He has a particular interest in the 7th to 9th century CE, as well as maritime connectivity between Southeast Asian cultures, Tang, China, and the Indian Ocean world in general. His museological focus engages with the issue of restoration and curation of Asian art. His book, Buddhist Landscape, Art and Archaeology of Khorat Plateau, 7 to 11 centuries, has just been published with NUS Press and explores the development of this religion in northeastern Thailand or Isan and central Laos. He is co-editor with Nicholas Lavi of Before Siam, Essays in Art and Archaeology, published by the Siam Society and River Books in 2014. Co-editor with Alan Chong of the Tang Shipwreck, Art and Exchange in the 9th century, published by the Asian Civilisations Museum Singapore, and has contributed papers to leading academic journals such as Anthropology, Asian Perspectives, the Journal of Royal Asiatic Society, and the Journal of Southeast Asian Studies, amongst others. As of 2024, he is a member of editorial board of the Journal of the Siam Society. Please present your book. Okay.
All right. Thank you, Ajahn Pipat. Yeah, just unfortunately, I have a little bit of a cold. It's more of just a dry throat because for the last 2 days, myself and Pipat and Long Boy and a few others were doing a workshop in Angkor and Sawan, looking at some Dvāravatī sites, particularly Jansen. So it's just from being in too much aircon and then out into very hot archaeological sites and back into museums, I've got a little bit of a frog in my throat. So I'm sorry if it's a little bit husky. Thank you, everybody. Thank you in particular to the CM Society for hosting this talk tonight. I was really happy to be able to do the first book launch in Thailand. I thought it's really important that I should be here doing it first. So I'm really happy that we're able to do it tonight at the Siam Society. And I'll be looking at we have about sort of 45 minutes, so there's no way I can get through all of the information and all of the topics in the book, but I'm going to sort of focus on some key areas. So yeah, that's my little plug that if you want to know more, the book is there for you to purchase. I will not make any more plugs on that. Just first, yeah, sorry, it's difficult for me. Yeah, just want to dedicate this lecture to the memory of Professor Elizabeth Moore, who I think most of you know, and who passed away this year. She was my academic supervisor, so obviously this book has come out after her passing, so it's a little bit difficult. But some of you may know that a lot of Elizabeth's work in her later life focused on Burma, but her original PhD thesis and much of her early work was on the Khorat Plateau, particularly moated sites. So she was a trailblazer in that field. So yeah, I just wanted to dedicate it to her tonight. Oh, sorry. This way. Just on the book, quickly, it is part of a series that we're publishing with NUS Press Singapore, and it's supported and funded by the Southeast Asian Art Academic Program at SOAS University of London, which is funded by the Alphawood Foundation, of which my post is one of the 3 endowed posts. So again, I just want to give recognition to the funders of this program. As I said, this is the third book. Thank you. The first one, where's the pointer? Is there a pointer on this? Okay. The first one is called Returning Southeast Asia's Past. It's on restitution and repatriation issues. The second one, that's by Louise Tithicott and Panga Ardiansa. The second one is another edited volume by Professor Ashley Thompson, who's also a professor at SOAS, and it's on early Theravada in Cambodia. And then mine is the third in this volume, which focuses on the Khorat Plateau. There's another one coming out, hopefully, in about a year's time that focuses on Indonesian bronzes. So do look out for them there. It's, I guess, it's our sort of motivation to really build a sort of strong publishing series on Southeast Asian art and archaeology. So yeah, this is, as I say, the third book in that series. Oops. So today I'm going to be talking about the Khorat Plateau. I think most of you are familiar with where it is. But I want to make one thing very clear. As you'll see on both of these maps, there's no modern political boundaries. So when I use the Khorat Plateau, I'm talking about both Isan, or northeast Thailand, within the modern-day nation-state of Thailand, but also parts of what is today Laos. Because if you think back to the period we're looking at, 7th to 11th centuries, neither of these nation-states existed at that point in time. And actually what you see, or what I will try and prove today, is that the culture on both sides of the Mekong River is essentially the same culture at that point. So it's not really until the 19th century, with the coming of the French imperialism in Indochina, that the Mekong River becomes a border. Up until that point, it was always a route of transportation, exchange, communication. So I think that's important to bear in mind. So yeah, that's why I don't call it Art and Archaeology of Northeast Thailand, or archaeology. I call it Khorat Plateau, specifically because I argue that this geographical and cultural area has quite a specific culture in its own right. So what I try to do is really trace the movement and spread of early Buddhism into the Khorat Plateau in the 6th to 9th century. This is the earliest evidence we have for that occurring. And as Ajahn Gop mentioned, this was built on my PhD fieldwork first, which took place between 2007 and 2009, and then a follow-up fieldwork in 2010 and 2014. And for the last 10 years after that, I've been trying to write it and get it out. So yeah, it's taken a bit longer than I hoped, but it's here. So I map and analyze the distribution of these archaeological sites, and from that try to infer different or certain interpretations as to what's going on. And again, I think it's really important to emphasize that a lot of literature, whether it's in Thai language or English language or Western languages, tends to see the Khorat Plateau as a sort of derivative culture of Dvāravatī in central Thailand and sort of Zhenla and later Angkor civilisations to its south and its southeast. But I'm really trying to argue that I think we need to see it as a region in its own right. It's not an interface, as Bob Brown calls it. It's a region in its own right that I think also influences both of these neighboring cultures. In chapter 1, I look at the actual evidence for the archaeological evidence for Buddhism in the region. I look at settlement patterns, so these moated sites. In order to have Buddhism spread into a region, you need to have pre-existing settlements, usually settlements that are large enough to support and sustain the Sangha. So one way that archaeologists can try and interpret this or try and identify this is to look at settlement patterns. And within them, sometimes you have earthen mounds that then turn out to be religious architecture, usually stūpas, or sometimes we have one or two examples of what we think are ubosats, but very few actual structural examples. There's ceilings, and then of course there's Buddha images themselves, and there's sīmā, so it's sīmā stones, like you say here. They're the actual majority evidence. That's what I primarily looked at in my PhD thesis, and then with the book I tried to expand it out to look at sort of the complete evidence we have for Buddhism, or as much as I could get my hands on. So if you're not familiar, sīmā stones are Buddhist boundary markers that even today, if you go to a Thai temple, you'll see them placed in a set of 8 or 16 usually around the ubosat. So they demarcate the sīmā, right? The sīmā in Pali is the boundary. And in order to have ordination ceremonies and the patimokkha ceremony, you need to have a designated sīmā. So without that, you cannot ordain monks. So actually the sīmā stones, evidence for sīmā stones, is very important because it shows that during this period they were able to create these boundaries using these monumental stone, carved stone. So what my distribution analysis showed is that we have quite a lot of sites along the 3 main river systems, and they do seem to group into different clusters. I'll get to that in a minute. But of course, there are the 3 main rivers within the Khorat Plateau. There's the Mun River, which is here, and the sites are in blue. There's the Chi River system that runs sort of diagonal across the Khorat Plateau. And then there's the Mekong River, the Mekong. And you can see quite clearly that a lot of the sites cluster up around what is today modern-day Vientiane province and Udon Thani, Loi, and Nong Khai province of Thailand. We get another cluster here in near Tat Phnom Jetty, and also in Sawanaket on the other side. And then I further subdivided this into clusters where I thought there was a clustering of that maybe we can read a sort of groupings or cultures off this. So I did it either via geographic proximity, obviously is an obvious one, but also looking at iconographic and stylistic similarities. If the Buddhism that we find or the objects we find in certain sites are really close in terms of style, then we can maybe start making arguments about certain workshops, in certain locations. I think I won't go into that anymore because it's quite detailed, but again, if you do want to read more about it, you know how. Tonight, I'm just going to focus on 3 clusters given sort of time constraints. So I'm going to focus right here in the center. This is cluster 1. Then I'm going to go down here and look at cluster 5, which is in the, or part of cluster 5, which is in the Mun River Valley. And I'll finish by looking at these sites up in the northern reaches of the Khorat Plateau that straddle the border between, straddle both sides of the Mekong River. So yeah, let's look at cluster 1, which is here. So the main site I'm going to focus on, which you probably are familiar with, is Muang Phadet, which is the largest, one of the largest moated sites within the Khorat Plateau at this period. And it's also got the most evidence for Buddhism as well. So from that, I infer that it must be this center of Buddhism within the region. Whether that's where Buddhism first entered the region or not is unclear, but definitely by the 7th to 8th century, we have this very detailed, very kind of extensive Buddhist culture within that region. Yeah, it's at 170 hectares in size. It's one of this plus Muang Sīmā that I'll look at next. These are the 2 sites that have substantial architectural and artistic remains as well. It has the most number of sīmā stones at any site in the Khorat Plateau, and it's really, you know, it's really smack bang in the middle of the Khorat Plateau and the Chi River system. So it has this very important location of maybe sort of controlling the different trade routes. And we can maybe start thinking about, is this the Wendan or Wenchan that's mentioned in the New Tang Annals? So the Chinese sources do identify a number of sites that appear to be on the Khorat Plateau. So this is the site itself. You can see it starts as a sort of small oval site, and then it expands out into this large-scale moated site. The moats are still functional today. They're quite large. Some of them actually function as rice paddies, as you can see. And I just want to show 2 of the sīmā stones from this site, actually. Probably 2 of the most beautiful or most well carved. So the one on your left, we've identified as the Kulavaka Jataka. So you can see this is probably Indra in the center. He's holding the Vajra. And these are these 3 handmaidens. And in the Jataka, one of them actually gets turned into a bird. And so it's there. We can identify Indra because he's riding his elephant. So very detailed carving. This one, they're both at Khon Kaen National Museum today. This is one of the real highlights of the museum, but also of the sort of Sīmā tradition. And it's the Buddha's return to Kapilavatthu. So it's after the Buddha comes back, after he's reached enlightenment, and teaches the Dharma to his wife and his son. And you can see, hopefully you can see this is his wife, and then this is his son, Rahula, here, being held up. And you see the Buddha seated. The other reason this Sīmā is quite significant, or a lot of scholars have looked at it, is because of the architectural details that we have on it. As you can see, the Buddha is sitting in this pavilion-like structure that's most likely made of wood. So we know at the period, the only structures that were made of permanent building materials such as brick or stone were stūpas or religious buildings, but vernacular architecture like palaces or buildings was made of wood, so it doesn't survive in the archaeological record. So all we have to go on is images like this. And then you can see this wall and gate below with these sort of soldier figures as well. So again, probably quite reflective of what Muang Phadet looked like at that time. So there probably was some type of structure running around it. But unfortunately, these are the only sort of glimpses that we get. We don't have any other substantial archaeological evidence to indicate what things may have looked like. We also get stucco and terracotta that again is usually placed either on the outside or the facade of stūpas. So you can see here sort of some Buddha images and a bodhisattva here. So I want to look at the surrounding sites. They sort of argue that it's a Mungfared mandala. I presume you're sort of familiar with the mandala concept, which is this idea, sort of South Indian idea of political organization that survives actually in Thailand right up until sort of the sort of modern period, where you have a center that contracts and expands with its, depending on its influence. So it's not really a fixed territorial boundary per se, but it's a sort of idea of a center and periphery, and the further you get out from the center, the less influence the center has on these smaller sites. So it's a sort of tributary system where you have maybe vassal states or vassal towns and a central town. So I argue that maybe that's sort of what's happening here. And maybe its direct influence of Mungfared sort of spreads over these cities. I argue that mainly because of you find very similar art and archaeological evidence at these sites. What I want to focus on tonight, just briefly, is as well as sīmā stones being quite a particular or distinctive characteristic of the Khorat Plateau, you also get these mountaintop sites. And at this period, these are the only ones. You don't really get these in central Thailand, and they always have, you know, the Buddha in Mahaparinibbana, or sleeping Buddha as it's colloquially known, which is of course the moment where he reaches or enters nirvana. So this is one called Pubo, and you can see that they're carved into the rock face. Obviously the paint is a modern addition, but they're very interesting phenomenon at this point. And again, sort of stylistically, what we would call sort of Dvāravatī style in terms of the art, and the style of the Buddha. This is another one very close by at a temple called Pukau Puttanamit. But can anyone see anything that's different about this? Yeah, right? This one's lying on his right, and this one's on its left, which is quite unusual because the sleeping Buddha or the Mahaparinibbana is you know, primarily always this way. So this will get described in the literature, and I think even in my PhD I called it like another sleeping Buddha. But actually when we look at it more carefully, maybe this is not the best detail shot, it looks more like a monk. So it doesn't have the snail curl hair. It's wearing the Buddhist robe. So this may be an image of a monk, again, particularly because it's facing the opposite direction. But again, what's interesting is we have these upland sites. So one of the reasons why I call the book Buddhist landscapes is this idea that Buddhism is inscribing itself both physically but conceptually on this landscape. So sort of Buddhicizing the landscape. And it does it in a variety of ways. It does it through sort of in these major moated sites through architecture and these large-scale sīmā stones, but it also does it in the landscape, in these mountaintop sites. Yeah, there's this debate about where is Wendan. Wendan is the Chinese term. We don't know what it would be called in either English or in Sanskrit or in Pali. We have no inscriptions from Mungfared or any of the sites in this area that name the name of the moated site or the culture. Unlike, say, in central Thailand, where we have Dvāravatī inscribed on a number of objects. But we know that it sent tribute to China on 4 separate occasions, right in the 8th century, which is when Mungfared is at its height, archaeologically and architecturally. So some people think it's the land Zhenla that is in modern-day Cambodia. Claude Jacques has suggested Wat Phu Champasak. Hiram Woodward has suggested Sitep, but Sitep is too far north, I think. You can see here, Sitep would be here. So there's a Japanese scholar, Tatsuo Hoshino, who's actually looked at these very carefully, and they're not translated. This is one of the issues. They're still in Chinese language. And he suggested back in the 1990s, actually, that the inner capital was Dvāravatī, which is, a site here, and Muang Phra is the outer capital. And he did this by trying to match the descriptions in the Chinese sources with the landscape of the Khorat Plateau. So I essentially agree with him, but I think it's probably the other way around. I think that maybe Muang Phra is this capital, and maybe Dvāravatī is a vassal. But it's purely a hypothesis. I need to underline that, because we have no inscriptional evidence actually, saying this is, it would be nice to have an inscription that mentioned the name of Muang Phra, but we don't actually know. Muang Phra is a modern Thai name for the site. But if you look at the sort of description in the Chinese annals and the overwhelming archaeological evidence, to me it's the obvious choice. I just wanted to look quickly at cluster 3. We do have some inscriptional evidence. What we do see as well is ideas of continual worship of sīmā stones that I don't have time to get into tonight, but is another sort of interesting phenomenon in terms of this culture. But yeah, this is one of the ways we can tie down dating a bit. We have some inscriptional evidence. Usually it only gives details about donation and so on, so it doesn't give a lot of actual historical detail. And a lot of them are in Mon, so the language they're in Pallava script, but in Old Mon. Some are in Pali, some are in Sanskrit. So again, sort of culturally, the region is probably Mon Khmer at this point, but again, we need to be a bit careful reading ethnicity just off inscriptions. Obviously, that's the language that their inscriptions are in, but whether that's the language they're speaking or not, the vernacular language, is another sort of trickier point to get to. But we were talking recently, myself and Ajahn Gup, about one surviving community of Mon in Chayapum, which I think Difloth has actually talked about as well. So there is still sort of ethnographic evidence that we can try and build on as well, but it's a bit scant, unfortunately. They also have one of these Buddhas in Mahaparinibbana at this site of Puwiang in Chayapum province, which is actually the cover of the lecture today. And again, it's over 3.7 meters long. It's a really quite impressive archaeological site, and it's quite a climb. It'll take you about an hour to get up there. And I did it in 2014, and it was tough then. And I think if I did it today, I'd really be struggling. I'd be even more hoarse than I am now. But it has a 2-line inscription on it that's been dated to about the 8th and 9th century. And what's really interesting, if you look at Ajahn Kauklai's interpretation of it, he says that the people of the town, so we can presume that's a town in the nearby countryside, have arrived to make merit. So this is probably a pilgrimage site. And if any of you have visited it would make sense. It's a remote climb. You can still get up there today. There's still ongoing worship at the site. So tomorrow I've been asked to give a talk at Thammasat where I'll really look at it in more detail. So if you are interested in that, do come along. And also Sedes has also found another inscription in Chumphea, which is the district nearby, which mentions Punya Kasetra, which he suggests is a place of pilgrimage. So I suggest that maybe that's referring to this Buddha image. But again, our evidence is unfortunately tentative, not definitive, but it's possible. I want to move down into the Mun River system. And I make an argument that in the book that, again, that the other major moated site, Muang Sīmā, which is here, which is just outside of modern-day Nakhon Ratchasima, or Khorat, the town of Khorat, is most likely the location of Sri Chanasa, this kingdom that gets mentioned. And I say that because there is an inscription that was found at the site. And again, when we look at the archaeological evidence, it seems to be the most dense and comprehensive within that region. It's also in a very strategic location. I'm sure most of you in the audience have taken the, what is it, Highway 1, right? So it's that American highway built in the 1960s, right? It goes right past this site. So that route up from Singbury up into the Khorat Plateau, that is the major entry point from lowland Chao Phraya Delta right into the Khorat Plateau. And Mung Fadet is located strategically right at that sort of gateway position. So actually, let me sort of move on. And you can see it's a very extensive site. It starts out with this, and then it expands over time. And when the Khmer move into the region from the 10th century on, in particular under Rajavarman II, they, as is their wont, they take over the site and they place a Khmer temple in the center with this square structure. So it's got multiple layers of occupation. These are just two of the architectural structures. This one here is most likely a redented or four-sided stūpa or jedi. This one we think is probably an ubosat or an ordination hall. It's got, you can see from the architecture, or maybe even a vihara. And you can just about see here there's post holes, and there's post holes all the way around it. So it looks like the foundations would be in brick and the superstructure would be in wood. That again doesn't survive. So again, we have evidence for religious architecture, but it's scant. This is probably the most impressive and famous sculpture from the site. It's located about 500 meters outside of the moated site, but it's within the same cultural period. It's this over 11 meter long Buddha in Mahaparinirvana again. So again, we start to see this importance of it. Yeah, it's 11 meters. It's not all one piece of rock. So even the head of the Buddha is about sort of 2 or 3. It's composite, but it's huge. So again, if you think of the amount of resources, expertise, this doesn't happen at a site that's not substantially Buddhist, right? This is something this is an important site with a lot of economic, financial, and artistic ability. Really impressive. And this is the Bo'ika inscription, which mentions, it's one of 3 inscriptions that mentions Sri Chanasapura. And it's named after this pond, which is right in the center of Mung Fadet, and this is where the inscription was found. Today it's kept at Pimai National Museum. This is what it says. So on face A, it records in Sanskrit the donation of over 20 water buffaloes, 50 cows and healthy calves, and 10 male and female slaves to the Sangha from the glorious Lord of Sri Chanasa to gain merit. So that's said as 1954 interpretation. You can find it. It's in, I think, volume 5 of his inscriptions of Cambodia. So again, a very clear picture of a king or a ruler donating or supporting the monastery. Most likely the sites that we've just seen. There was another one found about 50 kilometers away in Hin Khan, which also mentions Sri Chanasa. And then a third one comes from Ayutthaya, which is quite interesting but confusing. It dates to 937. And again, you can see the reference to Sedes. How it got to Ayutthaya is a question mark. But Peter Skilling has suggested that it was taken there in the Ayutthaya period as a sort of trophy of war, maybe. But we have no record of how it got there. And I think nobody's really suggesting that Ayutthaya was Sri Chanasa. I wonder if this is sort of its extent of its influence or power. You can see, obviously, it's located, as I said, at this very strategic point. There's an inscription at Wat Chantuk, again, that Peter Skilling has recently retranslated. It's in the Dvāravatī, Defining Dvāravatī volume that came out a few years ago. And it talks of a marriage alliance between the ruler of Dvāravatī and a daughter of presumably Mung Sīmā. So again, we see these little glimpses in the epigraphic record that point towards it being this important archaeological and sort of political center. So the other reason why I think it's, Mung Sīmā is probably Sri Chinasa is the evidence that we find from a number of sites in its vicinity. So I'm just going to sort of go through some of that. Again, I think you probably all are familiar with this. So the image, it's the same image, obviously. When I took it, I think I probably took this in 2014. Again, this in the National Museum. I think if most of you probably visited, it was in the when you come down the steps from the Srivijaya Dvāravatī section. It was there. But actually, about 4 years ago, the Fine Arts Department and the museum did this full reconstruction, quite hypothetical. Actually, when this bodhisattva, bronze bodhisattva, was found, you can see that the head alone is 73 centimeters. I mean, it's monumental. And I think as it stands today, when they reconstructed it, it's over 2 meters. So the curator, Dizipong Netlongmong, has done a lecture on it, actually. I think I can dig it out somewhere if you're interested. But they used, I think, 3D scanning technique to do the rest of it. But when this image was found in 1967, it was found by accident when some construction work stumbled across looks like the remains of a stūpa, and they found the head, but also the leg. So there's a Jean Boisselier article from 1967, if you're interested, and it shows the head, the leg. I think some of the arms as well. Yeah, you can see here. So what the Fine Arts Department did is try to, and the National Museum is to sort of reconstruct it in all its glory. So again, we have this really significant piece of Buddhist sculpture, obviously Mahayana, it's a bodhisattva, but we're not sure which one because the most important part is missing. And this side is, again, it's about, sorry, I should go back, it's here. So again, if you follow the Mun River system down, you get to Ban Tanot. It's about 30 or 40 kilometers away. So again, we have something going on in this vicinity. The other site that's really important is Ban Muang Phai. Sometimes this is called Ban Phai. Here. And again, these are all in national. These are both in the National Museum, Bangkok. This one's quite interesting. It's a slightly later Buddha image, sort of getting a little bit of Khmer influence with the more square face, or I maybe argue a sort of what I call a Khorat Plateau aesthetic. And then this one may be a little bit more familiar with what you see in central Thailand with the sort of classic frontal pose, most likely in double Vitarka Mudra. But again, we have these two very well-formed Buddha images. And then, of course, we have more of these bronzes. These were actually acquired by the National Museum Bangkok, I think in 1967, if I remember correctly. Again, they were discovered by a local villager who fortunately notified maybe the local Opado or the local district officer, and the Fine Arts Department actually acquired them. I think at the time it was like for 10,000 baht or something. But they're three very important bronze Buddhist images. Of course, the one in the center is very much, again, it's a Buddha image in double Vitarka Mudra, very much in that Dvāravatī style. The other two are bodhisattvas. I think that's Maitreya. You can see the stūpa in its headdress. This one doesn't have a stūpa in the center. It has this very elaborate top knot, this Datamukata, as they say in Sanskrit. But the actual center in here where you would expect a stupa or Amitabha Buddha if it was Avalokiteshvara is not there. And they're in this very aesthetic form, right? They have no jewelry. They've just got these short loincloths. And again, this is the one actually that the National Museum, they based the Bantanod Bodhisattva on this one actually. So again, we have this very well-defined bronze casting tradition in this lower Mun River system. And this is probably something you've heard about, particularly in Thailand. The Blaibat-2, or the so-called Prakorn Chai hoard, which is one of sort of the research directions I'm working on now. This was a hoard that was discovered or looted in 1964, 1965, and made its way, a lot of the bodhisattvas, so the sculpture made its way into major US museums, such as the Metropolitan Museum of Art, Asian Art San Francisco, Asia Society, Kimball Museum, Fort Worth, Texas. V&A has one as well. And they were all channeled or funneled through Spink & Son in London. And the name Douglas Latchford, unsurprisingly, is connected with them. There have been attempts by certain Thai grassroots movements and the Thai government to get these restituted as well. So that's an ongoing process. For many years, they were called the Prakorn Chai hoard, right? I think you're familiar with that. Prakorn Chai is here and has nothing to do with these bronzes. We think probably Emma Bunker and Latchford were, trying to put people off the scent. So came up, sort of said, oh, it's probably around Prakorn Chai, but we don't have any definitive evidence. But Boisselier, in his 1967 article, starts suggesting that maybe it's in Prakorn Chai, or even Prasat Lom Thom. But we now know it's from Blaibat-2. And a lot of that's been done by a colleague of mine, Thanonsak Hangwong, and his wife Lalita. And in 2014, the three of us visited the site, and we interviewed villagers in Banyai, which is right beside it. And they started to give us very detailed accounts of the looting. Thanonsak has subsequent, and a number of other people, Damrong, and this movement called SSO, you might have heard of it, Samnak Samrai Ong, or Reminiscing the 300 Buddhas, is a social media civil society movement that has campaigned for them to be returned. That's the topic of another lecture. But for tonight, what I want to really emphasize is that we have these other major pieces of Buddhist art and architecture located within this lower Mun River Valley, very significant. So this is Asia Society, this is the one in the Kimball, this is the one in the Metropolitan Museum, New York. I think you can see the similarity with the Bantanoat piece and the Banfai pieces. The actual numbers, how many got looted, is again very difficult to establish. There's this number kicking around of 300, which the first person that published that was Albert Le Bonheur, who was the curator at the Musée Guimet at the time. He purchased one of them, it's still there today. And he sort of inferred this from Boisselier, but again, it's very difficult to know how many were looted. I've sort of tracked about 50, 55 that stylistically fit into this group, but again, as I've shown, they could have come from any of the other sites. So again, this is one of the sort of tragedies of this story, is that because this material was looted, we don't have proper archaeological context for it, and it really hinders, I guess, the studies that I'm trying to do. But we do know they exist. I'm pretty confident that these three are from the site, and maybe sort of initial publications had like 20 or 30 of them that seem to be from the site. Sorry, and the temple itself is, what's also interesting but confusing is that it's a Khmer temple that dates to the 10th and 11th centuries, whereas these objects clearly date from sort of 8th to 9th. So it seems like they were gathered up at some point, and the villagers found them in a vault below the temple. So they were seems like they were ritually interred. So it seems like they were sort of gathered up and kept there. Why that happened, when that happened again, we just don't know. I'm just going to finish up by looking at. I got about 10 minutes. Yeah, looking at this. Sorry. What I call Cluster 6, which is right up in the north of the Khorat Plateau, and it straddles what is today modern-day Laos and Thailand. And again, you get this really intensive cluster of sites around here. So something is going on. There's sites down here as well. I don't have time to look at it today. But yeah, this is the amount of sites I've mapped within Vientiane and its hinterlands. And again, what's interesting is Hoshino, in his study, points out that if we take, and I know it's getting quite hypothetical, but if we take Wendan as Mungfaded, or somewhere in central Qi River system, the Chinese annals say that it had two vassals, Daoming and Kanban. Of course, these are the Chinese terms. Hoshino suggests that Kanban may actually be Sri Tep, and he may actually be right. Daoming is meant to be directly north of Wendan. And he thinks it's a rendering of Daoming of Tao Muong, meaning vassal state. Again, whether that's true or not, it's hard to know. He also argues that maybe the Thais or Thai speakers are in the region at this point, particularly here, obviously, if it's a Thai word. So that's another one of his hypotheses, but again, very hard to... definitely possible, right? I think, maybe it's... the inscriptions are in Mon, but maybe you have a mix of Mon populations and Thai. We know they're coming down from Sipsong, Pana, and these places. So, I think it's plausible. And we do have a few Buddha images. This is at if you go to Wat Ho Pragao, which is where the Emerald Buddha was. I'll put it politely. Was taken from. Originally, but today they've gathered up some of the evidence. So you have a sort of quite clear Dvāravatī image, or Dvāravatī style, if we want to put it this way, and then this Mon inscription. This piece is important. It's kind of quite nice stylistically, but it's got an inscription on it, and it's been read by Christian Bauer, who's, again, has published a really important paper in 1991 in the Journal of the Siam Society. He's a Mon language specialist, and he's read it. So it's cited in Michel Larian's work, and Michel credits Christian for it. But you have this 8-line inscription, and the term Sri Dharmaraja is part of it. So again, a king who rules in accordance with Dharma. So it's quite interesting that we have these references in the Chinese annals to a vassal state here, and then we have these little glimpses from inscriptions that maybe there's, sort of a king or some type of important polity in this region. Again, the archaeological sites would suggest so. What I want to finish up with is, you may be also familiar with Phuprabat, which is a very well-known site. I think the Siam Society has done tours there as well. But it's not the only one. There's 3 of them. And the other 2 are in Laos. So one's called Dang Song and the other's called Vang Sang. And when you look at them, they look like this cultural group, that the same thing is happening at all 3 sites. So I argue that actually you have this sort of either forest monk or this sort of group of this Buddhist group that's using these mountaintop sites. And of course, what's fascinating with them is that they blend natural formations, natural rock formations, with sīmā stones. Here, this is the famous Nang Usa's tower, and then this human modification here as well, right? So this is probably These are bricks, maybe stone brick, I think. And it probably functioned as a cell for a Buddhist monk to meditate within. So again, here, like we're seeing in the Chi River system with these Buddhas, Mahaparinirvana Buddhas, these mountaintop sites that were probably pilgrimage sites. Here we seem to have probably pilgrimage sites as well, but this Buddhist community that's basing itself up on these hilltops. This is Dang Sung, and you can see, again, it's quite similar. They build it under these rock shelters. You start to see the face is quite Khmer here, right? You start to see Khmer influence. So some of the imagery is a little bit later, maybe 8th, 9th, 10th century. But again, it seems like the same type of, conceptually the same thing is going on. And you still have monks today. This is it's like a slight, it's a seat, probably of teak or something. And there's a few forest monks that are still there today that are use it to meditate. So again, you can see the importance of this landscape. And the last site is Vansang, which again, you see these Buddha images carved in. Some of them have been restored. These have been restored maybe in the 1960s with cement. There's older photographs by French archaeologists from the 1930s or 50s, I think, where they're more complete. But again, a very similar type of phenomenon. And I think on this site, there's actually, you can see slots carved into the rock face. So they probably had a pavilion or an awning that came out and covered the site. So yeah, I'm going to finish up. So yeah, really what I try to do over the past sort of 10, 15 years is to look at what's happening in the Khorat Plateau in the sort of 7th, 8th, 9th century. The reason I started this is because when I was looking at the literature, it sort of really downplayed the Khorat Plateau as a significant region. And through my archaeological survey, I've managed to show that the evidence is much more extensive for both Buddhism, but also sort of different polities that may have existed within the region. You can see, of course, that the river systems play these key roles in distributing or sort of as transfer networks of this. I haven't talked too much about sīmā tonight because that's sort of something I've talked about a lot before. But you have this really fine narrative art on them that develops primarily in the Chi River system. But then in the Mun River system, you have this highly skilled bronze sculpture casting technician. It's limited to these sites, Blaibat 2, Ban Mung Phai, Ban Tanoat, maybe a few others as well. But it's very clear. I didn't talk about these stupa kumbha motifs today, but they're another feature of the region. So yeah, I really try and argue that we need to think of it as its own region. Of course, there's influence coming in from central Thailand. You can see from the style that they're quite similar to Dvāravatī images, but it's not derivative. It's taking that and making it its own. And who's to say that ideas from the Khorat Plateau are not going back into central Thailand or into Zhenla, which I do argue in the book as well. There's an important site on Phnom Kulen with sīmā stones as well that I argue comes from the Mun River Valley. So again, I'm really just trying to sort of recenter our thinking on the Khorat Plateau. I try to sort of gather as much evidence as I can get my hands on, essentially. And this is my sort of hypothesis of what it may look like, but yes, in red. That if we look at Sri Chinasa, the texts do say that Dvāravatī, the Chinese text, it says Dvāravatī is to the north of it or to the east of it. It's not always fully clear, and of course, when the Chinese text was written, these polities obviously exist over maybe 300-400 years, right? So whereas the Chinese text is just referring to one specific moment in time in the 8th century. So of course things are going to shift, particularly if you sort of follow that mandala idea. But I think we can say there's definitely something going on in this region that's important? Is it the Sri Chinasa polity, perhaps? Is this Wendan? It makes the most sense in terms of archaeological evidence matching with what the Chinese texts say, and then we have this big cluster of sites here. I haven't talked about other sites today, but you can look at that at your leisure. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your presentation, and congratulations for your book. And like anyone, do you have a question to Dr. Stephen Murphy? Oh, come.
Thank you very much for a very edifying discussion of the region. When you mentioned the Mun River, that it had more bronze than any of the others, is there any relation to copper mining, or anything there rather than other areas?
That's a really important question. Unfortunately, and what's interesting as well is that we only get the bronze Buddha images in the Mun River Valley. So we don't get them in the Chi or the Vientiane. So it's clearly something's going on in that region. And this is where I think we have to look at Zhenla as well, because at that period, pre-Angkorian period in Angkor or Phnom Kulen, they also have, so there's the site of Akyom in Angkor. And actually the Buddha images from Akyom look stylistically pretty much the same as the Blaibat 2 pieces. So there's definitely technology transfer going on, and there's, these regions are fluid. I think we just have to be careful about thinking there's hard boundaries between them. But to your question, unfortunately not. And I've talked to a number of French colleagues, particularly Brice Vincent at the École Française in Siem Reap, and he's done a lot of work on bronze casting. And even in Angkor, they've only found one foundry. They only found that him and Martin Polkenhorn and some of the Cambodian colleagues excavated it about 5-10 years ago, and that's the only one they found, and that's for Angkor. So but Brice will say that actually, and I think there's quite a lot of ethnographic evidence to support that this type of bronze casting is quite portable, and it may not actually leave a lot of archaeological evidence. So, but I mean, again, it's like that would be the sort of, what's the word? Like, archaeologists, we always want to find production sites. Like obviously with ceramics, we know certain kiln sites, and if we could find the bronze foundry somewhere in the Mun River Valley, we'd hit the jackpot, right? So, but it may or may not ever be found, unfortunately.
We have time for a few questions. Okay.
Thank you very much, and for this very illustrative presentation, and that give a very good overview, I think, of the material culture of the Khorat Plateau. I have one very naive question, and I'm sure I'm not the first who has this question. Are we really sure that the so-called Baisema from this region are actually Baisema?
Yeah, no, that's a very fair point.
Just to other people to explain, because in Khorat Plateau we found some places where there are maybe, 30 or 40 stones, and I know that nowadays some of these stones are actually used as Baisema. And I also know that I think at least one inscription has the word Sīmā.
So one has
that Sīmā can means also border on the person.
There's been some that have been excavated in situ. So there's been some at Mung Fadet actually. There's a few of them placed around the Ubosat. So Ajahn Pasok Indrawat excavated there in the 90s. But even back in 1967, I think they did original ones. So they were found, as far as we know, they were in situ. There's a site recently, I think I can show you the map, Ban Prakiap in Buriram, and they've the Fine Arts Department have just done some really great excavations there, and again they found them in situ. So yeah, maybe I can go back. Yeah, so there is a number of sites where they do find them in situ. So this site, yeah, they're excavating there right now.
What do you mean in situ? You mean like 8 or 9?
Yeah, 8 or 9. So in the actual,
okay.
yeah. So, and again, this in terms of the numbers, sure, like you only need 8 or 16, right? But that's for one sīmā, right? So if you want to have more than, sometimes they're in double, right, in pairs. But if you want to have, more than that, then, maybe there's 2 or 3 different monasteries. But also these sites stay in existence for about 300-400 years. So there might be this sort of continual development. But yeah, so I would definitely, I don't think anyone has put forward an argument that they're not sīmā.
How do you explain the field of like 40, 30 sīmā, which are not organized?
So today some of them are not in situ anymore, right? So they could have been moved, but a lot of them, if you read the initial reports by the Fine Arts Department, a lot of them were found around mounds, again, usually in pairs of 8, and then they were gathered up by local villagers into the local temple. So that's why today a lot of them are in the local temple, but again, I try to look at a lot of these sites are moated sites as well, so I try to, but it is actually Ian Glover, the late Ian Glover asked me this question a long time ago, when I was doing this, how can you know for sure, right? But again, we have to obviously, it's a supposition based on the evidence, but we have just that one example from Bansidat, I think, that Seda is translated, so yeah, but...
Thank you very much.
I arrived a little bit late, so if you covered this at the beginning, please advise, and I'll look it up in your book. But could you say, you mentioned C-tape a couple of times, and often in discussions of C-tape, there's people note that they believe there's evidence of influence from the cultures of the Khorat Plateau.
Sure, yeah.
I wonder if you could say a little bit more about how C-tape fit, this mysterious C-tape fits into these mysterious places and cultures.
It's a really good, C-tape, of course, is on, even before it got World Heritage Site status, for most archaeologists, of course, it was, a very interesting and problematic site. And, I thought a lot about it because technically it's in central Thailand, right? It's if you sort of follow these modern day but also geographical boundaries. So I didn't include it in the book, but sort of part of me was like, should I put C-tape in? But then it would be at least another chapter, right, to do it justice. So I don't discuss it too much in the book, but it is this very important archaeological site, and of course yesterday we were in Chan Sen and Dongmei Nam Muang. We were in this region, and it's very clear that there's this this is sort of one cluster of sites that are quite easy to access. They're definitely speaking to each other. But to your question, if once you get, I didn't talk about today, but there's a cluster of sites here. And if you follow that along, of course, and you come down, you'll get to C-tape. So again, in the Chinese sources, they say that C-tape, I think, is halfway between, is it Baekdono, I think, the Pew, and then and Cambodia, right? So it's sort of, again, it's this crossroads of this site that's very important. What's fascinating, of course, is that the Brahmanical imagery there is very close to what you're getting in Zhenla, right? So if you look at sort of also Funan, but you get none of that on the Khorat Plateau, right? So this is one thing I looked for. Within central Thailand, of course, it's more mixed. It's primarily Buddhist, but in quite a lot of, like Utong, for example, you get Brahmanical, you get Shiva Linga, and so on and so forth. But CTEP is unique because it has, I think, equally strong sort of Dvāravatī Buddhism and Brahmanical imagery. Of course, there's the famous Sritep Vishnu image. There's a Surya cult there as well that Peter Skilling has written about. So yeah, I mean, I'm not really giving you an answer, but it is something that I think we do need to think more about. Yeah, and again, sort of a question mark for me is that, yeah, how come you're not getting, that sort of Brahmanical imagery within this region might suggest that, yeah, there maybe, yeah, that it's on a trade network, but it's still more connected with what's going on maybe here. Of course, Dongsi Mahasot, you get these Vishnu images or Brahmanical imagery there as well. So maybe it's more, I would say, more connected with sort of upper central Chao Phraya River Delta. But yeah.
Could you explain more about the relationship of the Khorat Plateau and the Champa?
And Champa, okay, yeah,
on the right side. So,
this is going to sound like a plug, but I wrote an article. Yeah, I was trying to get that map will do, but I wrote an article in a volume, École Française volume in 2019, where I looked at the artwork on the sīmā stones from Muang Phat Ed, and some of the Cham sites in My Son and Dong Duong, and some of the postures are extremely similar. So again, it seems like, and I think when I published that, I wasn't aware that, you have this one sīmā stone site here. So this is the Lao Bao Pass. It's still like the major road today from Laos into Vietnam. And when you go over this, you come straight down into Da Nang, which of course is, very close to My Son and a few other key sites. So yeah, there's definitely connection between Muang Phat Ed and then this Cham culture in the 8th, 9th century based on a number of stylistic grounds. So yeah, again, this is another really interesting sort of connection. But you don't see Cham artistic influence on the sīmā or on the art of the Khorat Plateau. It seems to be sort of going the other way. But they're definitely communicating with each other, and maybe from the Chinese sources. So the Chinese sources say that this cluster here is a vassal state of. I probably should have stayed on that map. But yeah, they say that this cluster here is a vassal state of I think somewhere in Cham. So the Chinese, I think, as well are aware that there's a trade route coming in here, and then you have this cluster of sites here and a cluster of sites here. And of course there's Wat Phu Champasak, which I talk about a bit in the book, and it's just extremely important. So it's another node, right? If you think Muang Sema is here, Wat Phu Champasak is here, Muang Phat Ed is here, and then maybe another, something here. They're all at these key points on these river systems. And in the 7th, 8th century, you get these Buddha images in Wat Phu Champasak that look very similar to what we're seeing in, So again, there's more going on than I had a chance to talk about tonight. But,
hello.
Oh, sorry.
I would like to know what tradition of Buddhism was dominant there. I mean, you have a Sanskrit and the Mon and the Pali inscription, but what do you think is the most dominant tradition of Buddhism?
Yeah, I don't really like the word dominant, but so again, some scholars have tried to read, the type of Buddhism off the archaeological or art historic evidence, but it's very difficult, right? So when you only have, a handful of Mon inscriptions, some of them in Pali, some of them in Sanskrit, but then you have all these other bodhisattva images that are clearly Mahayana. So it's a mix, right? And I think we have to think about how does Buddhism move into regions. It's not a uniform movement. It's not like one sect saying we're going to go and spread into the Khorat Plateau. The way Buddhism works, and if you read Peter Skilling's work, is it works as modules, right? You have these groups that move, and then they can set up a sīmā, and once they set up that sīmā, they can sort of self-replicate, if we want to use those type of ideas. So there's no sort of overall, like, central Buddhist authority that's controlling this. So what you see is different forms of Buddhism moving into central Thailand, Khorat Plateau, different parts of the region. But getting to your question, if you look at the jatakas that are on the sīmā stones, some of them follow almost sort of word for word certain Pali renditions. So I will say, yes, okay, this sīmā or this jataka, it looks like it's the Pali version, but we don't have manuscripts from that period, right? So we don't know like what Buddhism's coming in. We don't have inscriptions. So again, it's quite a dangerous thing to try and read, and there's quite a lot of reading back, that, it must all be Pali Theravada Buddhism because that's what Thailand is today, and that's just not the case, right? And you can even see within central Thailand, right? You have sites like Kubua, which is clearly Mahayanist, and what's happening at Sitep. You have this mix of Brahmanical traditions, Buddhist traditions. You've got Mahayana Buddhism, in the sort of Mun River Valley. So, you have this mix of different forms, and I don't really want to get into but even the images that map quite closely onto the Pali Jataka, you can also find Sanskrit renditions in the Lalita Svatra that are quite similar as well. So, it's quite a difficult difficult game to be playing. So yeah, I shy away from it and actually, when I sent this book out for peer review, it was anonymous, and one of the peer reviewers is a Buddhist studies person, and they really push back against that as well. So if you talk to Buddhist studies scholars and even Peter Skilling, they'll be quite cautious about at this period. I mean, I know by later periods, by Ayutthaya and Sukhothai period, we can talk about the reordinations going back and forth with Sri Lanka, but we just have no evidence, or not enough clear evidence for it. So, yeah.
We have 3 more questions over here.
Oh, well, maybe others.
I think she's first. Yeah.
My question is, maybe it's not a question, very rudimentary one. Can I see the picture of the Peruvian Buddha again?
Yes, sure. Let me do it this way. Yeah. There you go.
Yeah. I came here only to see this.
Oh,
because
wow.
35 years ago, I went there, but I couldn't reach.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And then 15 years ago, I went.
Yeah.
I could reach.
Okay.
Yeah. But it was quite different from this.
Oh.
And then
Okay.
your catchy phrase in the Science Society's paper, it was not the Peruvian. Peruvian was Peruvian, but it was not the Konkan. It was written the other Changmak name.
As what?
Other Changmak.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, you're right. It's not Chayapum. It's Konkan.
It's not the
yeah, it's
Chayapum.
Konkan. Yeah.
So I thought this is Chayapum new Buddha
that's,
because
sorry.
the stone.
Yeah, I was mixing it up with Champere. It's,
because
I'm
this
sorry.
goes.
It's Konkan. Yeah.
So when 30 years ago, and
Sorry.
then even 15 years ago, it's quite different. But stone is reddish, and then we can see. Maybe you don't like me to use the Dvāravatī, but it is round.
Sure.
And then not like this. So it was. I thought this is a new.
No, sorry.
New discovery, but this is a Peruvian.
Yeah. So I took
So
this
maybe
photo
they
in.
cleaned or what did they?
I'm not sure. I took this in 2014. So this is from 2014.
24,
10 years ago.
10 years ago.
Yeah.
I saw it 15 years ago, but the color was not.
So maybe because you can see, it's still under worship. So obviously there's gold leaf on the face of the Buddha. So maybe somebody's cleaned it, or maybe it's just worn away. So yeah, I don't know. But yeah, apologies for the mistake. Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying that. Yeah, I mean, it's different to. I mean, the face is quite sort of Dvāravatī if you look at it quite carefully. It's got the thick hair curls and the facial features. So I don't think it's that different, huh? Maybe. I think I need a close-up. Yeah, but it's quite a. Okay. Well, obviously, I can't know what you saw, right? I can only know what I saw in 2014 when I went. So there's not much else I can say to that. 10 years ago. Yeah. So.
Okay, thank you very much for a highly stimulating lecture. Following on from the question gentleman raised back there, I wonder in the very early pages of your PPT, how are you meaning the term early Buddhism?
Right, yeah. I mean, I guess early Buddhism, I mean it's the earliest form that's coming into the region. So basically what we're looking at in sort of the 6th, 7th century is the earliest evidence for Buddhism. That doesn't mean it wasn't there before. Like anything with archaeological evidence, you only get it once there's enough, like the religion is strong enough to start building sculpture like this, or building architecture, or building sīmā. That doesn't mean that it wasn't there earlier, but we have no way of showing that, right? So from a sort of disciplinary point of view, as an archaeologist, that's why I'll say the earliest evidence is sort of 7th century, because that's the earliest archaeological evidence we have. In central Thailand, we can, there's a bit more evidence to push the arrival, or at least sites like Utong may have a earlier sort of 5th, 6th century period. If we look at the stratigraphy and the carbon dating that's been done. But again, the actual inscriptions, there's no inscription earlier than 6th century either. I think the earliest inscription in all of Southeast Asia is at Wat Phu, which is the Devanika inscription, which is 5th century. So again, we can't push things further back than we have the evidence for. But again, if we look at the Chinese accounts of Funan, for example, they seem to be talking about the 2nd, 3rd century and this Buddhist culture. But again, none of the archaeological evidence dates to that period. So, maybe there's a lag between what you get in the archaeological record and what actually happened. But I would argue that's the same for anywhere, right? We can't obviously make an argument from absence, but yeah.
Thank you so much. The last question.
Okay, maybe a naive question as well, but what about archaeological evidence beyond artifacts related to Buddhism that have been found in these sites, namely coins and genetic evidence from skeletal remains? Is there much of that available? Have you taken that into account in your research?
Sure. Unfortunately not. Yeah, the short answer is no. So what's interesting is that, let me go back to one of the maps. Obviously people are familiar with Charles Hyam's extensive work. But most of the sites, as far as we know, so Mung Fadet and Mung Sema both have sort of late prehistoric layers to them, and so there is some. Sorry, I'm just trying to find. Okay, here we go. So yeah, Mung Sema, the excavations that have taken place by the Fine Arts Department can find evidence back to about the 4th to 5th century, but that's mainly through the pottery record. So there is evidence that the site itself started in the 5th, 6th century, or 4th to 5th century, but there's no other evidence beyond that. They haven't found any burials or excavate or there. So you have Ban Non Wat, right, which Charles Hyam and his team, and then Dugald O'Reilly have excavated extensively over many, many years. And they have a sequence, it dates back all the way from the sort of Neolithic, Bronze, Iron Age. They have a very thin layer of a Dvāravatī period. So that site is continually occupied up until that period. But by the time it hits the sort of 5th, 6th century, it pretty much peters out. So yeah, unfortunately, we don't have any site within the Khorat Plateau that has that deep occupation, and which is interesting because it suggests that by the time you get to this sort of early historic period, settlements shift, right? So these sites, that were important during sort of Bronze and Iron Age are no longer key sites in this period. So yeah, unfortunately, I looked obviously, and one of the first things I started doing was looking at what archaeological excavations have been done at sites, but there's very little evidence to push from the sites that have this evidence for Buddhism. There's very little evidence of prehistory, so they all seem to be settlements that start in or around that period. But the other problem is a lot of them haven't been excavated. So again, maybe if more of them were excavated, we might start getting a clear picture of occupation predating. I'm not suggesting that they weren't occupied before the 6th century. It's just that's when we start to get evidence, clear datable evidence, and in terms of Buddhist material and the pottery record as well. So.
Yeah, thank you so much. I have the last question. My question. In Thailand, many scholars use the term Dvāravatī Isan.
Yeah.
So your almost last slide, you try to propose that in Isan there were many polities in the different name from Dvāravatī. Sure. So should we change the name Dvāravatī Isan to Wantan or Tao Ming or Janasa?
Sure.
Sīmā?
There's political reasons for this as well, right? So, maybe I've been oblique about it so far, but, you have central Thailand. It's no accident that scholars in Bangkok are trying to say that Isan is a periphery of central Thailand during the Dvāravatī period. It's pretty obvious what's going on here. And Sedes was guilty of it as well. I mean, Sedes and people like Quartet Rails, they mapped the kingdom of Dvāravatī and pretty much, onto the modern map of Thailand. So, archaeology and politics are, if anyone thinks archaeology is neutral, it's quite a naive thing to think. I mean, and of course, I'm making a very clear political statement here as well, right? That, I think that but I'm doing it based, I would argue, on the evidence. And we have a tendency, and this is not just in Southeast Asia, it's anywhere. We have a tendency to, when we look at a map and it's blank, like a region, we have a tendency to want to fill it. There must have been something in there, right? And there must have been this culture, but no, right? I mean, we know even in the 19th century, Isan is quite an underpopulated area. So what I'm trying to do with this is just to try and show that archaeologically, if we sort of, the evidence clusters into certain areas. And yes, if we look at the art style, it's similar to what you get in central Thailand. So I'm not arguing that it's a different art style. But art style doesn't mean political control, right? So there's lots of analogies we can make today. I mean, maybe there's a certain influence there, but art style will spread, much further than a political center. Half of us are wearing Zara or, Uniqlo, right? I mean, but we're not controlled by Japan, or maybe we are. But it's the same type of thing, right? It's like things move, right? Trends move, art styles move, but political entities can be separate from that. So yeah, I mean, I'm trying to sort of push back against that tradition in this, in certain quarters that it's kind of lazy as well. Like, just sort of say, oh, it's all Dvāravatī, it's all the same. I think it's, once you start drilling down into the evidence, you get sort of quite distinct, and even what's happening up here, it's quite different to here. And so I'm trying to, just trying to maybe unpack it a bit as well, and suggest different ways of thinking about it. So.
Okay, thank you so much. Today, on behalf of Siam Society, I would like to thank you very much on your presentation and wonderful book about sīmā stone, or like one ton or something, cultures in Khorat Plateau. So thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you.